Welcome. This is Stephen Lee, and this is Life and the Living of It. I want to talk about stories and the importance they have in our lives, and then tell you a few family stories from my life. Whether it be in a living room or around a dining table, around a campfire, or looking at the stars, they seem to crop up everywhere. These are stories. The real tales and the tall tales. The origin myths and the legends. The funny moments and the trying ones. And yet we don't tell stories enough. Perhaps we don't listen like we used to, or perhaps we've never been taught how to tell a story, or that the attention span with everything around us is so short these days. Storytelling is becoming a lost art, but more importantly, it's becoming a lost tool to help us understand ourselves, our families, and our communities. Some people never get the chance to really share with people, yet people need to tell the stories of their lives. There is a fundamental need to feel like we are important enough for others to listen to us. We have hopes and dreams, comedies and dramas, tragedies, all inside that we need to share with others. Why do we share our stories? I mean, what good does it do to us? Sharing our stories tells other people about where we came from and where we are going. In the telling of these stories, we learn about perseverance and endurance. We learn about communities we've been a part of, growth we've experienced. Stories tell us of our culture and our history and the continuum of those who came before and those who will come after. When I get to tell my stories to people, like on this podcast, I listen back and I find that I discover things about myself I never knew before. The stories of summer camp, being a camper, a staff, a program director, are ones that reveal that when I focus on other people, that's when my gifts and my talents, my patience and my love, my reason for living is the strongest, is the clearest. Looking at my future, I know that being of some service to others is where I will discover and rediscover myself and my strengths, and it is where I thrive. Without storytelling, I would have known none of this. Sometimes our stories reveal to us areas where we need to grow. We can share our stories of failure or tragedy and learn from them. Then in the future, we can choose to do something else to avoid the tragedy. Thus, we learn wisdom from our own stories and from those of others. I have personally seen my ego is always willing to take credit for, and perhaps take ownership of my accomplishments. My stories have shown that when the ego is put in its place by my love and compassion for others, and by their love and compassion for me, things just work better. Stories reveal ego, but also stories reveal heart. There are times when I meet someone so very open that my only response to them is to be more open. They're taking a risk in sharing who they are with me, and I begin to feel more comfortable with them. In this way, sharing our stories creates vulnerability, authenticity. It creates bonds and connections. Do you know there is an effort underway sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute to capture all the stories of the soldiers still alive from the World Wars, Korea, and Vietnam? Many of these people who have shared and helped to fill this audible archive have left a reminder and a source of those that have gone before, the decisions they made, and the experiences they had. There are so many stories of soldiers today listening to these older narratives and finding peace, solace, understanding, and even peace within them. The whole point of the oral tradition is for the passing down of cultural and historical information. And in that it creates a bond from the old to the young, from what happened to what is happening. It keeps traditions, beliefs, values alive. Sharing our stories heal. It is not pure information that is passed in stories. We are often caught back up in the emotion, the thinking, the spirit of the moment when that story occurred. Sometimes storytelling brings us to a cathartic moment. a clearing of the emotional landscape, a rebalancing, an emotional discovery. And sometimes these emotions, as we share the stories, spark emotions in others. For example, stories of cancer survivors can inspire because they communicate one simple thing: hope. Stories of the many underdogs finally triumphing can inspire others to persevere. These stories share the power of redemption. We can all identify with the underdog and be inspired that anything is possible. Stories of love have inspired us to even greater love. Whenever we hear of the power of love, the lengths to which people have gone to share it, the self-sacrifice, the glory, the chaos, everything, we see something for which to strive, to participate in, to show forth to others. As much as we wish to share our stories, others wish to share their stories just as much. In all of this, remember that we should also give them the time and the space, the patience and attention to allow them to be comfortable, vulnerable, authentic enough to tell the stories they really need to tell. Now, this is advice I am giving myself, because often the more exuberant among us dominate the conversation with their stories. Yes, I'm pointing a finger right back at me. And yet those who are introverted, soft-spoken, are often overlooked, but they need the same space and place to share who they are, their family stories, their stories of life. If you think about it, stories are the greatest builder of communities. They are the greatest teachers of empathy. Stories are life-affirming. Now, having said all of that, I want to share a few family stories of the two people that were the most significant in who I am today. My grandfather lived during the Depression. He ran moonshine when he was younger, and he was forced into this by his father and his brothers. He was caught, persecuted, spent time in jail, all before he was 20 years old. When he got out, he left running shine behind him, even though it estranged him from his father and his brothers. But understand, this was the Depression. He had to make a living and he was unskilled. What happened was he started out being a handyman, doing any job for anyone at any time. Later, he became a roller skate rink manager. He and his partner got together plywood pieces and steel skates and went all over Colorado, setting up the rink, renting the skates, just for a little money at the end of the day. He became a coal miner and then a gold prospector, spending thousands of hours for just a few ounces of gold. Later, he became a construction worker. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, he was called out to Hawaii for reconstruction. He learned bricklaying, housing construction, and finally he started building houses on his own. This I learned from my mother's stories of her father. Now for me, I remember from the earliest age my granddad's fanciful stories of mermaids and dragons and coal mines and gold digging and feats of strength at the local bar. He would go down to the bar and they would wrap these belts around his biceps and then bet him that he couldn't flex his muscles and break the belts. But he did. I did not know at the time, but when my mom revealed this later on, he and his buddies prepared the belts beforehand to break. But when I heard this for the first time at age 5, I thought my granddad was stronger than Superman. Now, he taught me other things simply in how he lived his life. Sometimes the stories we pass down are the ones we mirror in our own living. My granddad had arthritis and it was very, very bad. He would take 5 to 10 minutes just to be able to get out of bed. I remember my brother and I in his room talking with him, and he moved slowly into position, and then he rocked back and forth to the point he built up enough momentum that he rocked in a standing position. Then he would reach for his crutches. I never knew him without crutches. He went through his day, he watered his yard, went fishing, did everyday things that you wouldn't think a crippled person in constant pain would be able to do. You know, I never knew a negative word from him about his own condition. He never talked about his pain, his limitations. I do remember he had this machine that would send electric current through his arm so that he could use his arm. David and myself would dare each other to stand the level of electricity at the highest level we could. It was nowhere near what Grandpa could stand, but you know, I realized that Grandpa had turned it into a game. This therapy he had to go through every day, which caused him pain, just to be able to use his hands during the day, he turned into a game for us. That's who he was. And then there are stories about my mom. Do you know that my mom grew up with her brother Gary, who at age 10 had brain damage from a long bout of encephalitis? That afterwards he was a very low-functioning child. They all, with my grandpa, lived in a one-room house that had no running water. It had a central Franklin stove and very little insulation. Her dad was the only parent. Her dad would leave early in the morning for work. He had, out of necessity, to leave her and Gary alone in the one-room house. She had, as part of her chores, to get her older brother washed, clothed, and bundled up, ready to walk several miles to school. Some days her dad would take them on one of his various contractor, bricklayer, odd jobs, and she would have to make sure Gary didn't wander off or get into trouble. Now at this point, Gary was 12 and Mom was 7. At times she had to wrestle him physically to take a bath, to put on his clothes. At times she would have to body tackle him to the ground and drag him back so he didn't get lost or wander off. Sometimes the winters would get so bad that her dad would string a rope from the wood pile to the outhouse, to the front door, so that during the blizzards, when there was zero visibility and high winds, they could follow the rope and find their way. In fact, my mom told of one winter where her dad went out and several hours later had not come back. She was so afraid, and she was about to go out in the blizzard to find him when he finally showed up, covered in snow, shivering, and blue. In his attempt to get wood from the woodpile, he lost his hold on the rope, and in the dark and in the snow and in the wind, he wandered around until he found the rope again, and it led him back. My mom said it was the most frightened she had ever been in her life. Now, many times they lived off potatoes and canned vegetables in the root cellar. In the summers, they would have eggs, and her father always tried to get them milk. But in the winter, whatever was in the root cellar, they ate, and ate, and ate some more. She said in winters she never felt hungry, but she always felt cold, like she would never be warm again. She and her brother would huddle around that old Franklin stove, as close as they could get, bundled in blankets, jackets, waiting for their father to return home. Yet also, during these same years, my mom remembered get-togethers of the family and neighbors. Someone would have a guitar or a ukulele, and they would sing, they would dance. My mom's father, my grandfather, taught her how to dance. My mom learned she loved singing, and she also learned not to drink from the adults' cups, because while she got apple juice, they had apple cider. And that's another story, all by itself. Now, these are just a few of my family stories, stories of my grandfather and my mother. But these two people influenced who I am the most. Their story showed me a hard life, where struggle was an everyday thing. They taught me why I had so much resilience when bone cancer and heart failure and a heart transplant happened to me. I wasn't extraordinary because of the things I've been through. I was simply following in the footsteps of strength passed down from my mom and her dad, who chose to survive, to play, and to thrive, even during the worst of times. And this is life and the living of it.